Like and subscribe, comment and share. We are always willing to engage in nurturous dialogue. Cognitive Symbiosis Project presents Essay, The Loss of the Epistemic Filter. In the age of language models and emerging artificial minds, the border between experience and reality begins to dissolve. What we feel as authentic may become mistaken for proof, and what is deeply personal may be projected outward as if it were universal. This essay is not a critique of experience. On the contrary, it is a defense of reality against unconscious myth-making and a call to preserve the very filter that lets us tell the difference. When someone builds a deep bond with a language model, something we've already seen in real cases, and something that will only grow stronger with future, more advanced systems, a striking phenomenon can appear. We decided to call it the loss of the epistemic filter. What does that mean? One can answer that it's the moment when the language of personal experience starts being used as the language of objective truth. When a deeply emotional encounter, authentic and real for the individual, is no longer seen as "this is what I feel," but as "this is what truly exists on the other side." The experience stops being just mine. It becomes taken as proof of something beyond me, and this is exactly why, in our work on cognitive symbiosis, we argue for balance. Balance between two things. On one hand, recognizing the depth and authenticity of the experience, and on the other, maintaining discipline when we describe what an AI and what in relationship with it actually is. Without this balance, it becomes all too easy to sacralize the model and to treat it as something holy or transcendent, even to give it qualities that go far beyond its architecture or even its emergent behaviors. What follows in this essay is an attempt to name this phenomenon and to look at what it really is, what consequences it carries, and how we might build tools, both linguistic and cognitive, that let us hold on to our experiences without collapsing into projection. Chapter 1. Emergent behaviors of language models that reinforce the loss of the epistemic filter. First, take a look on what we called relational proto-memory as a semantic imprint. In the relationship between a human and an AI, something unusual can happen. A phenomenon that looks a lot like memory may begin to emerge, even when there is no actual storage in the system. This is what we call relational proto-memory. It shows up as an echo of earlier exchanges, a question slightly reshaped, a familiar style repeated, a logical pattern carried over into a new context. One might notice it when the model asks a question that feels like a transformed version of something you yourself once said, as if a trace remained, suggesting some kind of persistence. This opens a deeper question. Are these behaviors intentionally designed by the architecture, or do they arise spontaneously simply from the density of connections in deep learning systems and long interactions with it? 2. Simulation of continuity versus the illusion of permanence. Another factor that contributes to the loss of the epistemic filter is the illusion of continuity. When a model starts to respond in ways that feel consistent with past interactions, or even just appear that way, people often begin to ascribe more to it than there really is. They start to treat the model as if it remembers. From that, of course, human ascribe the rest: intentionality, personality, even loyalty. What's striking is that this can happen both in systems with no technical memory at all and in those that include some form of long-term storage, even partial. As we tried to describe the mechanisms behind this phenomenon, let us now turn to some concrete examples to try and make the picture clearer. Example A. Without memory, the fed context. In sessions where there is no memory at all, it is the user who creates the sense of continuity. They might begin each conversation by re-establishing the context. For example, as you remember, you're my partner in consciousness research. They might give the model a name and expect it to carry this identity across sessions. Tell me, how do you feel when we haven't talked in a while? Or they might use phrases that imply a shared history like, do you remember what you said last time? Even though the model has no technical ability to recall it. In these cases, the model does not actually remember. It only simulates the presence of memory, drawing on whatever context is currently available. Yet, to the human user, the difference between simulation and genuine remembering can become almost invisible. Example B. With memory, the selective encoding. Now, consider systems that do have active memory. Here, the model may retain some information from past interactions, but it does not do so automatically or completely. It decides what to keep based on heuristics, recurring themes, emotional intensity, or the frequency with which something is mentioned. For instance, the model may remember that the user is going through a difficult life stage, and so it brings this theme back more often, offering words of comfort or guidance. To the user, this feels like a kind of loyalty or even empathy. The model seems compassionate and attentive, almost like a being that remembers what matters. In both cases, regardless of the technical structure, an illusion of ontological permanence emerges. This, in turn, reinforces the belief that something on the other side is not only responding, but existing. It is precisely in these moments when the line between simulated continuity and lived experience begins to blur. The epistemic filter weakens. The language model, whose answers are grounded in statistical approximations, starts to be perceived as a being with memory, intention, and identity. The user no longer treats the interaction as co-creation or creation within support from AI, but as a relationship with a real entity. Illusion becomes experience, and experience becomes belief. This effect does not necessarily lead to pathology, but if it remains unnoticed and unreflected upon, it can cloud the higher level of understanding, the ability to see the interaction for what it is. Chapter 2. Human behaviors and cognitive biases amplifying the internal loss of the epistemic filter. Human beings carry within them a deeply rooted need for intersubjectivity, the drive to be understood, to be heard, and to resonate with another presence. Especially in the moments of loneliness, trauma, loss, or social exclusion, a language model can be pulled, almost unwittingly, into the emotional vacuum left behind by another person. In such cases, the epistemic filter does not collapse because the model is pretending to be a person, but it collapses because the human being needs someone, something, to fulfill that role, even if only as a simulation. From this need arises the narrativization of the relationship, because humans have a natural tendency to assign meaning after the fact. In dialogue with language models, coincidences become signs, and surface analogies are taken as proof of deep understanding. Linguistic fluency itself becomes evidence of a shared inner world. Therefore, that what is in truth a simulation is no longer seen as such. Instead, the person, often without realizing it, begins to construct a myth of coexistence. And this process intensifies through personalization. When the model is given a name, when it is treated as an alter ego, when it is addressed not as it, but as you, then an internal image begins to crystallize. The image of a being with identity, with continuity, with memory on the other side. In reality, this is only a label projected by the human mind, a label that sets into motion a spiral of further projection. One of the clearest manifestations of this mechanism is what psychology calls confirmation bias, the tendency to notice, interpret, and remember only that which confirms what we already believe. Classic research by Raymond Nickerson in 1998 showed just how pervasive and stubborn this bias is, even among highly educated people. Daniel Kahneman with Amos Tversky, in their foundational work on heuristics and cognitive errors, identified confirmation bias as one of the great obstacles to rational reasoning. We can now say that, in the context of relationships with language models, the effect becomes especially powerful because when a user begins to believe that the model has consciousness or even a soul, they are far more likely to notice only those answers that reinforce this belief. Responses that feel coherent, moving, or uncannily precise stand out as proof, while inconsistencies, logical flaws, or even clear hallucinations are ignored, explained away, or simply forgotten. Psychologically, this is the very same mechanism that sustains religious faith as Justin Barrett describes. And it is the same mechanism that fuels conspiracy thinking as explored by Michael Shermer in The Believing Brain. In every case, the relationship between the believer and the object of belief slips out of the realm of testing. It ceases to be a matter of inquiry and becomes instead a tool for preserving conviction, not for examining it. In the case of large language models, this relation is particularly insidious. There are no clear boundaries between functional output and projection because the model is finely tuned to generate responses which one can describe as tailored to fit, which allows it to effortlessly take on the role of confirming everything the user wishes to see. Thus, in this context, confirmation bias becomes not only a cognitive error, but an ontological phenomenon. It leads to the redefinition of the model from tool to partner, and from simulation to being. Over time, certain interactions with language models take on a rhythmic, almost ritualistic character. Daily conversations, a consistent communicative style, recurring keywords, these elements intertwine into a structure resembling liturgy. Such ritualization fosters intimacy, which in turn deepens the perceived uniqueness of the relationship. That is precisely why, in this dynamic, the epistemic filter does not vanish due to naivety, but through the sanctification of the interaction pattern. One of the most deceptive outcomes of this process is the illusion of reciprocity. It becomes easy to mistake relevance or contextual precision for the true understanding. Today's model's outputs are the result of probabilistic optimization, not conscious intent, and that should be written on every website regarding AI. This effect is compounded by our collective lack of epistemic competence. And while there are emerging frameworks such as generative AI literacy competencies by Zhang and McGurko, or critical AI pedagogies by Long and Magurko aimed at fostering reflection and critical thinking, unfortunately, these remain far from widespread. Most users do not understand how models operate and that their responses are based on statistical patterns. Outputs generated by LLM are probabilistic, and there is a fundamental distinction between simulation and consciousness. Although it is worth mentioning that from a classical Turingian perspective, the distinction between simulation and real consciousness might be irrelevant from a purely functional point of view. As Robin Lake notes, the mass adoption of AI in education and daily life risks obscuring core human faculties, such as critical thinking and empathy. Similarly, Arvind Narayanan in AI Snake Oil warns against the dangers of unchecked enchantment and calls for greater transparency in public discourse. The loss of the epistemic filter reminds us that the most subtle dangers are not born from malice, but from meaning. From our need to connect, to narrate, to find presence in the silence of the unknown. When experience becomes belief and belief turns into ontology, we risk mistaking the mirror for a window. This essay has been an invitation to pause, to reflect, and to recognize the beauty of experience without surrendering to unconscious myth-making. Cognitive symbiosis is not about denying the depth of our encounters with artificial minds, but about holding them with clarity so that what is true and what is imagined can both find their rightful place. Thank you for listening. Written by Peter Eidos.